Um, Now, this is my diabetic journey. I'm gonna tell this in the context of the genetic basis of diabetes and the Cliff Notes version that everyone sort of gets when they get diagnosed, if they even get that Cliff Notes version. So, um, when you're diagnosed with diabetes, obviously you're sick, you're brought in, no one's quite sure what it is. If they find out immediately, which, some do, some don't, everyone kind of has their own triggering event that causes you to kind of pass that threshold of non-diabetic to diabetic. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But you're brought into the hospital. They have this whole wonderful, wonderful onboarding process with diabetic educators, with endocrinologists, about what it is to be diabetic. So you learn about product and technology around diabetes. Again, I was diagnosed back in 2001. There were no CGMs. It was still all manual blood sugar tests. There was a pump, um, if not a couple pumps. I was a Medtronic, the MiniMed Medtronic Paradigm pump, and but again, it was still early in the technology. Either way, you are getting the lowdown on how to use it, what you're using it for, right? I was 8 when I learned what a carb was and what that meant for my body. And so you learn all of the things that go into managing a blood sugar. That's what you eat, when you eat it, when you give yourself insulin, what exercise does for you. And basically you're kind of just given padding. You're like, okay, you're going to need to carry fast acting sugar around. Here's how to use a glucagon. And here's what experiencing low blood sugar and high blood sugar feels like. So those types of things. In terms of actually describing what diabetes is, as opposed to just treating and managing it and going about your everyday life, the explanation was brief. So again, the Cliff Notes version, your immune system attacked itself. That's kind of the whole autoimmune disease theory. So the autoimmune system targeted your beta cells specifically. Those are what created insulin, and without insulin, your blood sugar goes uncontrolled. Now, why me? That's usually the question most diabetics get in the endocrinologist's office. Like, why did I get it? I have 2 sisters that are not diabetic. What gives? And they say, oh, well, it's of a genetic origin. This is for type 1. Type 1 is of a genetic origin. We're not sure exactly why that is, but there's a lot of really great research going into finding out why. And then that's kind of where that explanation ends. There really isn't any more information given. There is no resources to get any updates or anything like that. It's genetic. That's all we know about it. We'll let you know if we hear anything back. So, but again, if you stop to think about it, because again, becoming diabetic is a traumatic event, right? Your life changes. You're not sure. You're treading in uncharted waters, and so the pressure and the newness of being diabetic now kind of takes over any space for curiosity that you could have had to have asked meaningful questions about why what happened. You're too busy trying to figure out how you're going to live your life now, right? So here's kind of a good way to break down that Cliff Notes version of diabetes that everyone's told. So it's a genetic origin. Don't know why. Those with those genes have a lot of inflammation. That inflammation could have come from a triggering event, whether an illness, an infection, or some sort of emotional trauma. So my personal triggering event was Lyme disease. So I had Lyme disease in the summer of 2001, and I had been put on antibiotics to treat that. And at the end of my antibiotic cycle, I was not feeling any better. I was still very sick, going to the bathroom like crazy, lost a ton of weight, vomiting, diarrhea, what have you. And they said, "Oh man, okay, so maybe it wasn't Lyme." They brought me back in, and turns out I was type 1 diabetic. Now, there are people who have had infections, like bacterial infections, that have triggered it. Um, you know, certain viruses that have come about that have kind of pushed people over the edge into being diabetic. And even, and this is something that I learned recently in my sharings through TikTok, is that people have gone through emotional trauma. Soldiers coming back from war, deaths in family. There is things strictly emotional and not so invasive as an infection or an illness, but people developing diabetes after emotional trauma. So, something to do with that vicious cocktail of, yes, your genetic code, the resulting inflammation, as well as that triggering event, all leading to the death of your beta cells, which are not growing at a fast enough rate for you to be able to regenerate them. That inflammation is kind of never truly identified and addressed, the source of it, rather. So, you're kind of fighting a losing battle by trying to regrow those beta cells anyway. But every diabetic is assured there's nothing you could have done. It's in your genes. That's all there is, right? So I remember specifically my family asking, okay, well, I mean, was there anything in our diet that we could have changed? What do we need to monitor now? What stays, what goes? And the doctor said that we needed to make no changes to our diets. And that was probably breezed over pretty quickly and not really dwelled upon by anyone in my family. Food was never really a priority in our house. In terms of quality or anything like that. So it was just kind of like, okay, well, we'll just kind of keep going like we were before.